is Dr. K. Vijay Raghvan. He joins us now. He's the Principal Scientific Advisor to the Government of India and one of the finest minds in science in this country. It needs to be mentioned as we try and deal with this situation. But so we are now in a very difficult situation for all sorts of reasons. The primary concern among people in Delhi is how soon before more oxygen is made available in Delhi. Could you tell us the process of stepping up availability?
There is a very, thank you, Vishnu. There's a very rigorous process for evaluating what the oxygen requirements at any level are. And this is dynamic and it's also in real time. If there is any shortage of oxygen at any level, at any place, there is a website which the Ministry of Health has, where all the hospitals have now. And they log on and they know not only that there is a shortage at their place, but they know where else oxygen is available. So this is at the distribution level. In addition, there have been very strong measures taken now to transport in bulk, both in tanks and in cylinders to location using rail and road. So I think that the oxygen shortage will be addressed because in addition to what I've just said, you're going to see that industries, big industries which use oxygen without compromising on their output, yet by addressing and transforming part of their sources into medical grade oxygen, those again will be addressed.
And so just, in terms of time periods, before large parts of the country have access to a lot more oxygen than presently, would it be 48 hours, 72 hours, 24 hours? Could you, even for some areas, could you give us some time period? It gives people a sense of hope.
Well, I should say that, this is something which is ongoing and you'll see the results right away. Because as I said, there are, 3 levels of oxygen requirements. One, in terms of distribution efficiency locally, and that will be addressed right away. The other is, distribution to the locations from plants and so on. And the third is diverting manufacturing as needed. So you're going to see impacts on this right away.
Okay. The commercial availability of oxygen in cylinders, because, for example, in Delhi, my own neighbor wanted an oxygen cylinder. They haven't got the results of an RT-PCR test, but all the symptoms appear to be of COVID. The gentleman's oxygen saturation count has gone down. They spent the entire night, they weren't able to get it. These are common problems, obviously. When would the commercial availability of oxygen come back up?
I think you're going to start seeing that the return to availability and increased availability right away. Of course, this has to be balanced with the increasing number of cases and the rapid increase. And so that balance is going to be there. But oxygen supply is really one of the most important aspects, and that's being addressed.
I believe there's also a plan to import oxygen. Is that right? It was there in a press release 2 days back. From where, how soon, how will that help?
Well, everything is on the table. And, I've told you what the local manufacturing capabilities are. Should import be necessary and be done, that's also being examined by the government. And you'll hear, those results coming in soon.
Okay. My next question to you, how soon before we can surmount the present shortage of remdesivir?
Well, first of all, we must keep in mind what the global and national advisories of remdesivir are and when you can take that. It principally, has an effect in reducing hospital stay. And therefore, it should be taken in a very calibrated manner and not indiscriminately and on the advice of a physician. That care and calm in dealing with remdesivir will immediately also result in, lowering the run on the drug, as it were, in the markets. So that should be done. Of course, there are every other measures in terms of pricing, dealing with manufacturing, dealing with regulations on the active pharmaceutical ingredient, all of that which have been put in place, which should increase the availability.
And you're stepping up manufacture of remdesivir as well, right?
Yes. So there are about, I don't remember the exact number, but at least 7 or 8 companies and a few more which are likely to be have the capacity to manufacture remdesivir. And therefore, the active pharmaceutical ingredients and their formulations, their exports have been curb now. So that should also result in increased availability.
So Dr. Vijay Raghavan, again, that question of time. By when will all hospitals in, let us say, Delhi, which is facing this huge crisis, or other parts of India which is facing this crisis, when will they have access to remdesivir at the level that they needed for their monitored use? I'm not saying, everybody gets it, not at all.
So I think the last point you made is very important. As use becomes calibrated and reasonable and monitored, that will decrease demand. It's not a drug which should be used indiscriminately. Correspondingly, all the statements I made about the way manufacturing and availability is to be increased and also pricing to be calibrated will result in a very rapid, in a matter of days or less, availability of remdesivir.
So let's talk now about vaccines, sir. Covishield and Covaxin. When we were speaking last, I'd asked you a question on whether the government was moving towards funding the enhanced production of these drugs. That question remains, I think, a week later. When will the government finance the ramping up of the production of Covishield and Covaxin? Is that something you intend to do?
So there are two different vaccines and two different companies with two different kinds of requirements. Covaxin is manufactured by Bharat Biotech, and their requirement for scaling their manufacturing is being done both by their internal sources in partnership with government agencies and with government funds through the Department of Biotechnology. The Department of Biotechnology has put in substantial resources into scaling the manufacture of Covaxin. Now, Covishield is a much larger player in terms of volume, and for them to expand significantly also requires substantial additional investment. Those investments have been discussed publicly a lot, but we must keep in mind that they are not that difficult a sum, but also keep in mind that should those kinds of investments start, which they will, by a combination of ways with Serum Institute discussing with various agencies, with the government, that fruition of that manufacturing will take a few months. It's not a switch where the manufacturing can start right away. So we have to keep that in mind. In that period, given the new decision on allowing vaccines to be sold in India, which have been approved elsewhere, we will see likely the availability of other vaccines. We already have the Sputnik being authorized for emergency use, but the J&J vaccine will likely come in soon, both in terms of the manufacturing here, which will again take a few months, but perhaps also by the companies involved deciding to purchase if feasible. So with Sputnik and J&J, with the increased capacity of Covaxin, which is happening now, you're going to see increased vaccine available.
And as far as Covishield is concerned, how much longer before a decision is taken in which form, way, shape or form, additional funds can be brought on the table to step up manufacture? Because as you mentioned, it will take several months for it to materialize. So therefore, time is of essence. A month, a week, the decision-making process is all I'm asking about.
Well, the decision-making process involves three parties, and I think each of them have substantial say in the matter. But the primary party with the most substantial say is the company itself. The company is a strong, robust company, which is a well-known global manufacturer, and there's absolutely no issue, I should say, in their raising resources in discussions with the government on their own or with international players. So I think those kinds of decisions will happen very soon. Whether it's a week or 10 days, I can't say, but it'll surely happen very soon.
Okay, you were speaking about Sputnik. Has there been any decision on the price at which Sputnik V will be procured by the government?
Well, the point here regarding all vaccines sold in India right now is to keep in mind that vaccine manufacturing is an extraordinary process where great care has to be taken, requires experts and expertise, and therefore the whole product at the end of it can be quite expensive. Yet, because this is a pandemic, companies nationally and globally are selling vaccines at prices which are at cost or close to cost. And that will be the case for Sputnik also. So, in other words, you're going to see prices, I would suspect, comparable with what is happening right now.
Oh, really? Because that's really important. Because Sputnik sells at a little under $10 a dose to every country outside the country. So therefore, given the numbers in India, you expect them to come close to $2 a dose, which is what you're getting the 2 existing vaccines at. That's
I don't know the exact number, whether it'll be 2 or 3 or 5, but vaccines sold in India are substantially lower at cost than what corresponding vaccines are sold elsewhere.
And so, where are the talks right now as far as finalizing that? Because as I understand it, I'm not using the word hurdle, but that has to be sorted out before they can start.
No, I'm sure the health ministry is discussing all of this, and we will hear very soon about this, I'm sure.
Okay, and so you were talking about the other international manufacturers who've been cleared to bring their vaccines in, as long as it's been cleared by Japan, the WHO, the United Kingdom, or American. So it's safe, whatever is coming in. But as I understand it, all of them have existing orders, right? With so many countries. The United States has bought up so much. Canada has bought up so much. So therefore, realistically, how soon before it can come over here? And would they need to work with the government of India, or would they need to work with an Indian company to introduce it over here at the scale that they require?
This is a very important question in general about vaccines, and we have to look at it a little calmly. Vaccines are surely going to be a large-scale and complete vaccination, near complete vaccination, is going to be the way we go out of this. Meanwhile, it is important to realize 3 things. 1, that range of vaccination will take time. Secondly, getting these vaccines and scaling up will take time, in terms of procurement, manufacturing, and so on. And therefore, the third matter, every level of behavior modification where we can get back to the same kind of intensity which we had at a similar period last year is absolutely critical, because our sequencing and other information is showing the presence of variants which could be more transmissible. And therefore, the only way to deal with that now is push our own behavior substantially without compromising too much on our economy and livelihood and so on. So that's a challenge, and that's what we have to focus on. Thinking that you're going to get the vaccines right away and they're going to solve a problem is not correct. Vaccines are critical, they're important, but they will take some time.
We'll talk about what you just mentioned very briefly in a moment. I just have the variations of the variants. I just want to understand the present state of vaccination. It appears to be dipping, right? The number of the absolute numbers that we are vaccinating in the last few days appears to be going down slightly. Is this directly linked to people being worried about going out of their homes, given the numbers in places like Delhi?
See, what we have done is looked at the extent of vaccination state-wise, and many states have done above the national average in terms of utilizing all the vaccines they've got or near full, and others have not utilized fully. Of course, that would be the kind of spectrum you would see. So that needs to be ramped up about utilization as well as supply being ramped up. I don't think that there is a reluctance to get vaccinated. I have heard no reports about that. And what you might have heard, it may be anecdotal, but there is a great desire to be vaccinated. And I think that coordination and increased vaccination is something which is happening. Of course, the demand is enormous now, much more than it was when we had the decline in cases early this year. So I don't think there's a reluctance to get vaccinated.
Can doctors be shifted from areas where they are available to areas where there is a present crisis? Because you've seen doctors, healthcare workers, turning positive in the last few days in areas like Delhi.
That's a very interesting point you've made. What is happening during the current rise of cases is there's a variation from the previous year in terms of locations within cities and locations and socioeconomic strata. So you're going to have situations where some hospitals are extraordinarily stretched and other hospitals less so. That dynamic movement, therefore, of resources and medical personnel is something very important. And cities should really look at that and see how flexible they can be on that. That's a very important point.
Could the armed forces also be deployed with their large medical facilities, their own doctors, healthcare workers in a situation like this?
That is already being done. The DRDO and the armed forces have set up
A lab. A facility, yes, in Delhi.
Large facilities where, all the resources are available, and they're expanding that rather substantially. So they have a structure which is, very well standardized, and they have, an open environment now to get people. So that's going up in a big way. Absolutely.
So
the radios also, for example,
yes,
other agencies who have, medical services on scale are certainly rising to the occasion.
Now, let's talk about the strain. We discussed it a week back. Obviously, the understanding has increased over a period of time. It's bound to. So what do we know now, Dr. Vijay Raghavan, on B.1.617? Is it the dominant strain in large parts of the country causing greater transmissibility?
It's certainly increasing, and what we know of the biology caused by the mutations in it give good reason to understand why the increase is taking place. But again, the same kinds of caution were put about vaccines or drugs, that a lot of focus on what the virus does is, of course, necessary, but we should also keep in mind that the virus transmits through us. So there are two components to this, what the virus does and what we do. And what we do remains the same. And when you have a variant which is more transmissible, we should do that same thing with greater intensity and efficiency. So that's really the principal thing we need to do now. Vaccines still work, and the nature of the disease presentation has not substantially changed or significantly changed at all. And because we have far more cases, you're seeing far more of different levels of disease presentation.
Dr. Vijay Raghavan, with this strain now being detected in the United States and the United Kingdom, is there a concern that this could spread to many more other countries?
This is not, the kinds of mutations there are not different from the kinds of mutations seen in other strains which have increased spread. So it is just a combination which makes this a special variant there. Now, this is going to happen always. As you have great presence of viruses all over the world, there are greater chances of mutations. And when those mutations are such that they can actually transmit the virus faster, they will start taking over. So this growth will take place unless we amplify our social distancing measures, our mask wearing measures more efficiently, and increase vaccination hugely. So it is a race, and we will have to win it. There's no choice.
Yeah. A final question, sir. Where does India, or the world for that matter, stand in revising existing vaccines to counter the new strains?
Well, there are two pieces of very good news. First of all, the SARS coronavirus 2 is not vaccine recalcitrant. It can be killed by, its spread can be prevented by vaccines. So that's something very important to keep. That's the good news. The second good news is we are so rapid now in understanding through genome sequencing and biology the nature of mutations and how they affect immune evasiveness or vaccine evasiveness, that people all over the world and in India are designing vaccines which can take care of new kinds of strains should they arise. Remember, we're not waiting for these strains to arise before we design vaccines. Tests in laboratories all over the world and in India have identified regions of the spike protein which, when changed in a specific manner, can cause mild or more serious immune evasiveness. So there are people designing already vaccines which can take care of any kind of eventuality and protect us against the current variant C. So the vaccine design scenario is good. That will now also need to be amplified by vaccine production, which is also good, it's feasible, and vaccine deployment. Now the deployment part is interesting. No longer do we have to go through all the range of trials which we did for the initial vaccines, if we can prove that these new vaccines in each category are similar to the previous ones which have designed and used, except for some minor changes. When we can do that, the deployment also through the regulator should be faster.